A couple of reminders since you're here early is make sure that you have your Eat guidebook. If it came in the mail, we know that we ran into some USPS delivery issues, so some of them might still be on the way. But if you have it and you received it, make sure you take a moment, grab it, and make sure you have it in front of you and something to write with. And then also grab your beverage of choice. I just got a glass of Syrah here. But if it's a cup of tea, if it's a glass of water, maybe Jesus will turn some water into wine tonight. We could pray for that. But just grab a beverage of choice. We want to start off tonight with just a little fun toast. I told my kids, my youth kids who were joining, and so I think they're grabbing their own sparkling waters as well. And so if you don't have that with you, take a moment now to step away and make sure you have both of those, the guidebook and then also just a beverage of choice tonight as we um, enact the practice of eating even as we talk about it. So yeah, so we'll give it a few more minutes, allow people to join. While we wait, I like doing this just because it kind of warms up the chat feature. If you look down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see that there's a chat feature. If you can click on that and just put in what you ate for dinner tonight. It's like an ordinary Sunday, and so I'm sure it wasn't anything, doesn't need to be anything fancy, but just chat in there. What did you eat for dinner tonight while we wait for people to join? We had our kids' go-to absolute favorite of all time, spaghetti and meatballs. And I also made some garlic bread that actually turned out to be quite delicious. All right, so let's see what people are eating tonight. Pizza, Japanese, mac and cheese, which is great, rolls, the chicken, pork chops. Oh, I lost my chat here. Oh, there it is. Let's see. Sweet green, baked tacos. All right. Chicken and Korean japchae. Okay, I want to come over to that place. Black eyed pea soup and cornbread. That also sounds delicious. Seafood udon. Sunday roast. Okay, salmon and samosas. Man, you guys were partying today. This is a feast. Homemade chicken soup, salmon Brussels sprouts. Oh, I can't keep up. This is going to take me too long to read through all these. Steak with chimichurri. Wow, look at that. Tilapia, couscous, green beans. This is mom's pork belly. You all must know that I have a soft spot for pork, and so that sounds delicious as well. Asian ground turkey, cabbage cups, Japanese sweet potatoes, tacos, kale salad. Good job, Brandon. Nice healthy choice there. We actually did have a kale salad with our spaghetti and meatballs. It was not popular tonight, but Jordan and I definitely partook of the kale salad. Half a Costco chicken with bare hands. I don't know what. Oh, you ate them with bare hands. That's great. That Costco rotisserie chicken, we got to say, there is nothing better for the buck than getting that Costco rotisserie chicken, and then we make a soup out of the leftover carcass. Amanda had Rocky Road ice cream. That's another dinner invite that I would love as well. Are the Goss Chinese chicken and broccoli? All right, well, that's fun. Keep throwing it in there. I love to see people use the chat. We're going to be using that for Q&A later, so keep that open. And also, we hope it's an opportunity for you guys to just connect with one another. We really want as best as we can for these events to be opportunities where we feel like we're connecting as a community despite all the limitations around Zoom. Now that we have a little bit more folks who have been able to join us, if you are just joining us now, one of the things that I ask people to do is to make sure you have your EAT guidebook if it has arrived, if you can see that. I know we've been running into some issues with USPS, so some of yours, unfortunately, may still be on their way. But if you haven't, make sure you grab it. We're going to be using that during a time of just some reflection. So you want to make sure you have that with a pen or a pencil. And then also, we would ask some people to bring their beverage of choice. I just got a basic red wine tonight. I know other people might be enjoying your chamomile or other kind of nighttime teas or waters, but just bring your beverage of choice. We want to start off the evening with a toast. So if you don't have that, feel free to take a second right now and gather up those supplies. While you do that, I'm going to share a poll. It's a 6-question poll. And I know for some of you, you see a poll like this and it feels like you are taking a quiz at school or you're filling out a survey. But this is purely for fun, and we just want to get a sense for how you guys are reacting to these things or what your kind of current practices are. So I'm going to launch them and just answer them as you can. Don't feel pressured to make sure everything's perfect, but here we go. I think I just launched that poll there. And so you'll see those questions. So go ahead and just start filling out the poll. We'd love to see some of those responses as they come in this evening. So that first question, you'd rather meet someone for food, drinks, coffee, or ice cream? I think in the end for me, I'd have to go with food. Um, let's see. How many times a week do you eat with someone else? Now I'm seeing out of all of us, 0% has voted. It makes me wonder, am I doing something wrong? Or people aren't yet. Okay, there we go. Okay, some things are coming in now. Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. Oh, I guess you have to probably make it through all the questions and hit enter before I start to see the results. So that's probably the issue. All right, great. Well, we're seeing the results coming in. So thanks for filling that out. I hope it's just kind of a fun way to engage. So keep it coming. So lots of folks, yeah, seeing different responses come in now. How do you feel about the quantity and quality of the time you spend with people important to you? Which that's a great question. Might be a harder one in a time of pandemic. I think we're asking some of these more in like a regular world situation. We recognize that for all of us, we probably wish we had more time, both quantity and quality, with people that are important to us. But kind of in a regular rhythms of life, what are those? So thanks. Yep, keep those responses coming. Looks like we've got a little more than half of you have submitted that. The fourth question, how do you feel about, oh, I just read that. Oh, how do you feel about the quality of time you spend with people different from you? And that's an important question. We talk a lot about the dinner table being a place where God can do the work of reconciliation across difference, not least of which, of course, is drawing those who don't yet know Christ potentially on that journey towards the table of God's grace, which we were able to celebrate today. If you joined us for in-person worship, we got to celebrate Lord's Supper after the service, which was a beautiful thing. So keep those responses coming in. I'm going to give it maybe just another 30 seconds or so. So make sure if you're trying to wrap up, now all of a sudden feels like that old school time test, doesn't it? No pressure, but if you can get it in, we would love to see your result as well. And we're getting close. We got, looks like 77% of you have voted so far. All right, well, let me just start kind of talking through some of the results. About half of us prefer meeting people over food. That was the leading response there. Second was coffee, and both of those are kind of like bare necessities of the day. So it kind of goes back to the theme of, well, you're already doing it anyways. Why not use it as time to intentionally connect with people? How many times a week? Wait, if I end the poll, will it share the results? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll so you all can see the results. All right, here, let's do that. Okay, here we go. Now I think you see the results. Okay, so just over 51% there. How many times a week do you eat with someone else? About a quarter of us, less than a quarter, 0. A couple of times a week there is probably the most common. Some of us 3 to 4 times a week, which is great. Pretty much every day. That's great. And so we'll notice that we're already kind of engaging in this practice in one way, shape, or another. It's so exciting to think just a little bit of intentionality, how the Spirit of God might use that. How do you feel about the quantity and quality of time you spend with people important to you? Wow, 78%. I'd like more. That's certainly the answer that I would have placed as well. Just something about the desire to be present, not distracted with those that are important to us. We know we want more, but it can be hard to kind of pull off. How do you feel about the quantity and quality of time you spend with people different from you? Okay, so 76% said I would like more. It's funny, even in a city as diverse as New York City, how hard it can be to share a meal, something that's intimate and ordinary, with people who are different in our beliefs, in our cultural backgrounds, or even in our politics in this day and age. And so I think we would all benefit from more of that over a shared meal. There's so many conversations that if you're doing it over a meal, you can have that conversation in a way that's much easier in a strange way, isn't it? So how many times a week do you eat with someone who is, who's across a difference? Oh, how many times? Difference of belief or cultural ideology. Most of us would say 0. So more than half of us don't typically in a typical week engage with someone who has some kind of difference from us, which is maybe something we can be more intentional about. And how did you get to know the people you spend your time with? So what's kind of the sphere of your life that you're finding yourself engaged most in? And so work was a lead there with just over 53%, but school, neighborhood, church, hobbies, infinities, and mutual friends. All right, so I hope that was kind of a fun and informative and maybe even a little bit kind of self-reflective for you there. So let me close this down. All right, well, let me welcome everybody to this event this evening. Again, if you're just joining us, I've been reminding people, make sure you have your EAT guidebook if you've received it. We've run into issues with USPS, so some of them are delayed. We apologize for that. But if you haven't, make sure you grab that and something to write with. And then also to have on hand a beverage of your choice. I'm just drinking a red wine tonight, but whatever your beverage might be, whether it's a herbal tea or a glass of water, make sure you have that on hand. We want to begin this evening with a toast, embodying the practice of eating, even as we are talking about it. Also, if you weren't able to register in time for a guidebook, make sure for our next month that you register early enough so that we can have time to send it to you. And now we know we got to give a little bit more buffer just because glitches can come up with the delivery as well. Okay, so welcome. My name is Abe, pastor here at Redeemer Eastside. I love these events because I get to scroll through and see people's faces. Thanks for joining us this evening. The purpose of our time tonight is, if you've been with us, we've been going through these practices of peace, and they're 5 simple, ordinary practices that we want to use to frame our life together. We believe that these practices not only will draw us closer to God in a time like this is particularly important, but we actually also believe that these practices help us to be very regular and consistent in engaging the world. And the practice of eat maybe best embodies both of those, where it draws us closer to God, but also gives us a very practical and concrete way to engage with the world. So last month we looked at pause, which is the P in peace. And today we're looking at last month. Did I say month or week? My kids made fun of me, by the way, for saying Elijah Hamilton several times apparently in the sermon. And so I can't remember what I said or didn't say, but last month was pause. This month is the practice of eat, that when we walk with Jesus, we begin to eat as Jesus did, and we enjoy time with others, especially those who maybe would be unconventional, that will be more on the margins of our society. So we want to be a church that is known for this radical hospitality, that all of us, when we look at the people that we eat with, that list begins to look more and more like Jesus. And so let me see. Okay, so that's basically what we're doing tonight. Make sure you have that guidebook, and also we're going to be using the chat feature to do our Q&A this evening. So let's begin with a toast. If everyone could raise your glasses here, whatever they might be. All right, excellent. I'm seeing glasses on the screen. So fun. I love this. All right, and the words I'm going to use for my toast is actually words that are on the website of our guest, Aarti Sequeira, where she says this is her pursuit in life. This is what she feels like God has called us to do. If you follow us on Instagram, you've already seen this quote. But here's the toast. Here's to relishing our loved ones, embracing future friends, and giving thanks to the one from whom all good things come. So cheers. All right, so it's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the evening, Aarti Sequeira. She is a producer, journalist, food personality. Prior to the work that she does now on Food Network and other places, she worked as a producer in CNN. She was in journalism, and we're going to talk a little bit about her story. But God, by His own kind of providential way, has led her to where she is today. So that's just kind of a very basic introduction. Aarti, anything that you'd want to add just as far as how people can get to know you?
Well, I was a 10-pound baby when I was born. That's important. I grew up I'm Indian, but I grew up in Dubai in the Middle East, and I went to a British school there. And so that's why I speak with an accent. People are always curious about that. And the reason that I wanted to be a journalist is because I grew up in Dubai during the first Gulf War. And that was the first time that I had seen uncensored news. I grew up with censored news.
Mm.
And so it was CNN actually. And I was like, I want to be Christian Amanpour. And so, you know, as an Indian, my parents were like, you need to pick something respectable, you know, as a career. And journalism just eked by, you know. So I was really fortunate. My dad sent me to the States for university in Chicago. And then as I graduated, I got a job at CNN, and I was like, that's it, I'm done. And it has been a very wild and winding road ever since then.
That's great. Well, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and we're going to take the next maybe 20, 25 minutes or so, just kind of interview style, and just to get to know you a little bit better, but also to talk about this practice of eat. You know, I think you, in a very interesting way, both in your vocation, kind of embody this, but also you have a passion for it just in your own personal life. Let's see, I got to pull up my questions here. Yeah, so at Redeemer, we do emphasize the importance of integrating your faith and work. Like, that's one of our main emphases, that our work is a primary way we love God and we love neighbor. It's this idea that all of our callings are just as sacred as some might view my calling as a pastor. So just share with us, how do you see the work you do in the food space and as a chef? How do you see that as a sacred calling?
Goodness gracious. Well, I think the fact that I was called into this career at all was a sacred calling, because I was so desperate. All I ever wanted to do was be a journalist. And then I got married and I moved from New York, what's up, to LA. And my husband's an actor. So I was like, well, I can do news anywhere. And unfortunately, I couldn't find work. Once I moved, I don't know why, for some weird reason, I couldn't find a job. And so I really fell into this pit of despair, and this pit of like, I don't have any worth now, because I spent all my parents' money going to university. I started on this great career path, and now I'm sitting here twiddling my thumbs watching The View, you know? And so I started to cook. I'd always, I come from a long line of really great cooks, but I had never done it myself. I had never considered myself in that vein. But I loved watching people cook. I watched PBS shows, I watched Food Network shows. And so for me, cooking was a way of taking chaos and turning it into order, and taking ugly things, a celery root, for example, and turning it into something gorgeous and elegant and fancy, and that it wasn't something that I think I recognized in the moment, but looking back, that was so important to me, because it gave me a sense of meaning and purpose and control and peace. And so that's something that I still hold on to now as someone who cooks. Is I know that we can sometimes see it as a chore, and I completely get it. I now have 2 little kids. So when 4:30 hits, I'm just like, it's like any food competition music score plays in the background, dun, 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 you know what I mean? So I get it, but I try as much as I can to remember that it's such a privilege that we get to cook. And it's as in Indian medicine, like my Indian, it's part of the medicine is not just what you eat or the supplements that you take. It's actually the chopping of the vegetables. It's the cooking. All of that is meant to be a blessing to us. And so here, I'm going to tilt my screen up a little bit. You can see I keep a cross up there on my floating shelf. And I have a quote that says, whether you eat or drink, do it for the Lord, which actually is very appropriate for today. So well done. So yeah, and the food industry is not necessarily like a spiritual place. If any of you read any of Anthony Bourdain's books, you know what kitchens are like. Restaurant kitchens, they're rough, they're wild. There's lots of nefarious things happening, or at least back then there were. And so I remember coming into this world and being like, well, now how do I stay who I am in this very secular world? And one of the things, one of the simplest things that happened is, so often, like, the people at Food Network were just getting to know me. The way that I came into this career is I went on Food Network Star, which was, rest in peace, they're not doing it anymore, but it was like their top rated show at that time. And I did it on a total whim. I wasn't trained, nothing, but I sent in my tape and they liked it. So I did it. And so when I won, thank God, because otherwise, if I'd gone through all of that and not won, that would have been really terrible. Let's just be real. There were a bunch of Food Network people that didn't know me. And so the way that I got to know them was to go and eat together. And and I think that's significant, right? And that's exactly what we're sort of talking about, that is a tried and true way to, it's like when you break bread, you're breaking a wall between you. You cross a threshold from strangers to friends, even if you're enemies. I really think that there's something that happens. And so one thing that would happen when we would go and eat is I would always pray before my meal. I mean, I wouldn't do it out loud. I wasn't like hands up in the whole nine, but I would just sort of bow my head and pray before I ate. And I always felt awkward about it and always felt weird about it because, it interrupts conversation, and then people feel weird. Listen, that happens, but we just roll right past it and everything's fine. Well, like a year or so later, a bunch of development executives were trying to figure out a show for me, which was very kind. And they were like, well, what could we focus on that she loves? And one of them said, well, what about Faith? Because she always prays before she eats. And I was like, I would 150,000% love to do a show about food and faith. Someone else ended up doing that show. It's fine. But the fact that something that small made something that I felt weird about and didn't think was that significant made a real impact on this one person, and then in turn affected a whole room of people. I just think I think there are sort of huge moments that feel like you need to trust God to part the Red Sea. But I think there are also really small things that we can be doing that are much more powerful and much more significant than we give them credit for.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's great. When I think about the practice of eat, I think on the one hand, it's like just be intentional, like an ordinary thing. Just be intentional about eating people who don't share your faith, who have a different background,
Yeah.
and trust that God will show up and part the
Mm-hmm.
Red Sea in a way that you never could have planned for, you never could have forced to happen or engineer. And I think there's
Yeah.
something about that, because that yeah, the breaking of bread. I love that. Breaking of bread is like breaking down a wall. And you see
Mm-hmm.
that in scripture, right? The dividing wall of hostility has come down between Jew and Gentile. And the early church made sure that Jew and Gentile could eat together. That was a
Yes.
top priority in Acts chapter 15. And so I think there's something powerful about that God just shows up and he does it time and time again. So that's a beautiful story. Maybe we'll turn a corner to go from your sense of calling and vocation, which is beautiful. I wish we could talk more about that, and if we had more time, we could spend an entire evening talking about that. But let's kind of turn the corner and think about you, not so much as a chef, because not all of us are chefs. We're kind of ordinary cooks. More on the eating side. Actually, my wife and I joke sometimes. We're like, we look at our 4 kids and we're like, do all 4 of you have to eat every day? Like every single day, so that the monotony of the cooking can really get on you, right?
Yeah.
But if we turn the corner to somebody who eats, somebody
Yeah.
who goes from chef and then sits down and hosts a dinner or is a guest at a dinner, how do you kind of approach eating as a spiritual practice? Like, what are some intentional things you do as far as your eating side of things, or you're hosting people?
Yeah. I mean, I never knew that, when I the first church that I went to and like became a believer at, they did this spiritual gifts questionnaire thingy. And I was like, oh my God, it's just like Cosmo. So I filled it out. And, one of my gifts was this gift of hospitality. And that was before I really had kind of come into this world of cooking and stuff. So I was like, I don't know what this means. This is crazy. Now, of course, it has borne itself out in this way, which is very kind of obvious. But some of us have the gift of hospitality, and we shouldn't undermine it. It's a gift. I there is someone in my family who has many, many gifts that I do not have, and frankly, I covet. But one she does not have is hospitality. And I know this because I've been to a house. And, you know, there's just that feeling you get when you go to someone's house and they are so happy that you are there. That is something we can do, whether they're coming to our house or we're meeting someone for dinner, is just to make them feel like, I have been so excited about this all day. I have been longing for just a little time with you, just me and you know, that just, who doesn't want to hear that, you know? And so I do try to make sure that people feel that way when they come over or when we get together, because I think when we think about one of our most precious resources, it's time. And so if someone has given up their time to meet with you, to acknowledge that is just, it's just kind, you know. So so that's something I do. You know, we now live in Raleigh, North Carolina, but a year ago we moved here. So before that, for 2 decades we lived in LA, and LA is very much like New York, where it's a bunch of people that have moved there and are far away from family and the whole thing. And so we had a really tight knit group of friends, and we made sure that we had dinner together once a week at least. And I still, you know, if you're someone that cooks, make it so that someone who doesn't feels free to text you and say, what are you having for dinner tonight? Can I come over? I made sure that she knew that, and she took advantage of it, and I loved her for it, because, you know, it'd be Tuesday night or Thursday night, and she'd be like, I'm in the neighborhood, what are you having for dinner? And I was like, I'm making salmon and I'm saving some for you, get your butt over here, you know what I mean? And that was, to have that, I miss that so much because we've moved here in the middle of the pandemic, but to have someone feel like they can just text you and just invite themselves over, I mean, that's like Friends, isn't it? It's like the show Friends come to life. So that was something that was always so important to me. And these were people who were not believers. And honestly, we were friends with them for 16, 17 years, and they're still not believers, but that's okay, because when they came over, they knew that in our house we prayed before dinner. And so we would all join hands. And sometimes Bren would pray, sometimes I would pray, sometimes we would ask them, do you want to say anything before dinner? We want you to feel included in this. And so even my friend who is a new ager, or no, not my new ager friend, my sort of agnostic friend, she would take a minute to just say, I'm just so grateful. She couldn't finish it like grateful to whom, but that's okay. It was a starting point. I'm so grateful. And to invite someone into that, because isn't that what we do before we pray, is that we take a second, like we don't pray 5 times a day like Muslims do, but we can at least pray 3. And so to stop and to pray, or to be grateful, to acknowledge that you get to eat, to acknowledge that you're under a roof, to acknowledge that you're safe. These are huge things that we shouldn't take for granted. And so she would have that moment. And then my atheist friend, or no, my new ager friend, at the end, when I would say amen, she would say, hell yeah. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. That's kind of what it means. She was very uncomfortable with amen. So she would say, hell yeah. And I was like, that's cool. That's good. You know, the thing about like eating is that, and I think the reason that Jesus broke bread with so many people, and I'm going on and on and on, so please stop me, is that, Jesus, portrayed himself as the bread, right? And the lamb, and, living water, and the vine, and we are the branches. It was all food terminology. And we were talking as we were preparing for this, and you were like, why is that? I was like, I don't know. Why is that? You're the pastor. And then I was thinking about it some more, and I was like, I think it's because, God understands that we're finite. And, if he talks to us in terms of food, then if he talks to us in terms of food, then we kind of get like, oh, we would die without food. We would die without the Lord too. And I think it's getting close to that essential nature. He's trying to make that point, like, as essential as you think food is, you can go. My husband has fasted for 40 days. Don't think he could do 41, but he fasted for 40 days, but he couldn't do more than that. He would have died. You can go 3 days without water, then you'll die. Food is like, it attacks us in that place where we're like, we are not as powerful as we think we are. We can do great things. We live in skyscrapers. We can put a man on the moon. Now I guess Mars too. We can do all of these things. But if we go a certain number of days without food, we die. And so I think maybe that's why God uses food so often and breaking bread with people so often to sort of communicate like, hey, you're not meant to do this on your own. I'm meant to be in this with you, and let's do it together. That's my
Yeah, that's great.
2 cents.
I mean, it's kind of like the convergence of our vulnerability, right? We were made to need one another, made to need God. So our dependence,
Yes.
part of what it means to be creature, and we ought to be able to rejoice in it. So our food is just a daily reminder of just how frail, fragile, vulnerable we are.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's an everyday occurrence, and yet it's also the times where there's this deep communion, there's this deep connection, right? It opens us up to
Yeah.
that shared vulnerability, I guess it is at some level,
Yeah.
right? And then a shared joy in meeting one another across that table.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's even studies that show that when you share a meal with someone, it increases your trust of that person and it increases your ability to cooperate with that person.
Mm.
And I know in my past, I mean, I remember this one woman who I was having a really hard time with. And to her credit, she was like, let's go have a meal and talk about it. And when I actually sat across the table from her, sorry, the bubbly water is now getting to me. But when I actually sat across the table from her, I was like, it is really hard for me to be as vicious right now as I had been in my mind. Now, some of that is also seeing someone face to face, but there was something about us ordering food together. It's just like you get down to those really mundane things. And I also think there's something really intimate about like opening your mouth in front of people and eating. You know, I think about cultures where they cover their mouth when they eat and stuff, and because it's too much, it's considered too much. So to eat and to drink and that, you know, I just think it makes you feel very vulnerable and it's very intimate. And it's beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks for sharing all that. I think just your little practice of making sure people know that it's okay to invite themselves over to dinner. Boy, that alone, if we were to walk away saying, who are 5, 10 people in my life that I can make clear to them, you can invite yourself over to dinner every time. You know,
Anytime.
I mean, for us, like we have a big family, so you know, not everyone's in our situation, recognizing that. But look, feeding
Right.
6 people versus feeding 7 people versus feeding 8 people,
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of a wash, you know, and it's really just a matter of saying, hey, anytime, and people really feeling like they have that permission. I think about our neighbors down the hall, and
Yeah.
do they feel like they have that permission? Not yet, and maybe that's something that we can kind of get.
Yeah. I mean, and one thing that I do, this is tiny, but one thing I have always done is when people are like, can I have a glass of water? I'm like, yeah, the glasses are over there and the water's over there.
Right.
I want them to feel really comfortable, like they don't have to tiptoe around. And listen, I have invited people over when we had like tuna salad. You know, I don't think it has to be that complicated. Judging by my children, I mean, their most memorable meals have been like when I made them pancakes for dinner or I made them granola for dinner. I was like, oh my gosh, mama, there's no broccoli on the table. What the heck? I'm like, it's a special occasion, you know, but I think we get really caught up in the thing that we're making or eating or whatever. And I know I definitely do because I'm like, this is my love language. I'm making things for you. But I think if we make that the focus, then this is going to be the focus as opposed to that person being the focus.
Right, right. And actually, maybe is a good segue to maybe one last final question, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So if you've been listening and questions have been coming up, feel free to begin to chat it or start to move towards a question that you might want to ask. But, you know, when it comes to like hospitality or this practice of eating, there can sometimes be like this image of this ideal feast, and you have the silverware and you have the crystals out, and, you know, you have your best cloth napkins and, you know, just the whole shebang. And there are plenty of occasions where that's a beautiful thing. It's a way to help people feel that they're honored and welcomed and that sort of thing. How do you balance that out versus, hey, I just made some extra tuna sandwiches if you want to come over? Like, how do you work through that when it comes to practicing hospitality and this practice of eat?
I don't know. It's tough. It's a case by case basis. You know what I mean? I said the term love language. And I think you can quickly tell who cares about that stuff and who doesn't. You know, I have a friend who, when I went to her house for the first time, she was actually the person that told me to go on Food Network Star. I went to her house and I was like, okay, so when you come over, she had flowers, she had napkins, she had, you know, she's totally into Ina Garten. So things were just effortlessly spread, you know. And that stuff was really important to her. I don't think she would care too much, but she did it in such a way that it was food that was grabbable. And she just had everything there, so you didn't have to do anything. I think you can go in either direction.
Mm.
I'm much more of a, this is your house now, go get your stuff. You know, I'll help you obviously and tell you where everything is, but please feel free. Take your shoes off. That's the only rule. But like, please feel free to just put your feet up on the couch. Like, we don't have fancy things. Feel super comfortable. And then there's the other side, which is my friend Heidi, who is an impeccable hostess. She likes to take care of every tiny detail, so you feel like you never have to ask for anything. So it's just sort of, I don't know. I think you can go either way, really, with that. Was that the answer to your question?
No, no, yeah, that's no, that's great. Yeah, I think it's beautiful, and I think like cultures are sometimes different. My wife and I, you know, we're Korean American, and sometimes we're like, yeah, we're just used to everyone reaching over each other. We're used to
Yeah.
telling people, hey, good, can you get an extra plate because I forgot to grab one? So there's a little bit more of the
Yeah.
chaos, which is appropriate, and in certain cultures that can feel very familial and it can feel very honoring. Whereas other
Yeah.
cultures, more of the a little bit more formal, says, you know, we care about you. And so
Yeah.
even just the act of eating or the act of hospitality has
Yeah.
these beautiful nuances that I think are great. Because I think one of the questions that I wonder about, and we talked a little bit about this, is like the sustainability piece, right? So my wife and I were trying to ask ourselves, how do we get more regular with this practice of eat? And one of the things that we've done is we said, okay, every Tuesday, every other week Tuesday, we're just going to assume somebody's coming over.
Oh,
So
I love that.
grocery shopping, we're just going to get more because we know that that Tuesday is going to be more people. And so
Mhm.
it's on our calendar. And so if we don't have people in the slot, we're kind of scrambling, say, oh no, we didn't invite anybody for Tuesday. And we start texting people and say, hey, do you want to come over? And
Yeah.
that's one way for us to kind of tip the inertia more towards eating together than not, you know, so making that into some
Yeah.
like the default setting.
Yeah. I
Uh,
love that.
into small ways to say, how do we make this just a sustainable thing? And a lot of that can mean just go get a sandwich together. Or maybe it doesn't even have to be eating sometimes. You know, if you're going to grocery store, just text somebody and say, hey, let's go get some groceries together.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of
Yeah. I mean, I was telling you that I'm obsessed with this Turkish period drama that I'm watching on Netflix. It's like 8 seasons long and each season has 100 episodes. My husband's like, we're never going to talk to each other again. So and you know, in this show, they're Muslim. And but there's so much about that nomadic hospitality that feels like home to me because I grew up in Dubai and they were nomads. And so one thing that the matriarch on the show does is that she has two sons who one is off in the mountains training, you know, as you do, and the other one has been the last time they saw him, he had been taken by the Mongols. And so nobody knows if he's alive or dead. And she leaves a plate for him at every meal.
Mm.
And that made me think about your Tuesday nights, is that you leave a plate out for whomever is going to cross your door. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant. And, you know, as things sort of open up, I'm hopeful that, you know, we can encourage people to come over. We've had one group of people over already, which was awesome. You know, I meet people for coffee a lot. When we had our first daughter, so she's 7 now, we called her Boodle. And there was this couple who, he's also in the food business. And so we kind of knew each other, but not that well. And then we were getting to know each other in the process of bringing Alaya up. And so we were all obsessed with coffee, still are. And in LA, there was another sort of third wave coffee shop opening up every week, And so we started just meeting up for coffee every week, and we would bring Alaya and she would sort of run around and we would drink our cappuccino, and it would be like a 20 to 30 minute tops commitment. And it got to the point where my friend Sarah would text me and she would just say CBC, and CBC was Coffee Boodle Connection. And we would be like, let's go, and it was sort of like, in the old Batman show when they put the alert up in the, up in the night sky. And I was like, we're going to get coffee quick, everybody in the car. And that really, we weren't that close at the beginning, but after doing that for a few months of meeting up and having coffee and, assessing their beans and their microfoam abilities and stuff, it got to the point where we call each other framily. We're a framily. And that's just from having coffee once a week.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I could talk with you forever, Aarti.
Yeah, ditto.
Unfortunately, we want to move on to questions that people have so we can get to hear from them as well. And so it seems like there are a couple of questions that are already coming in. But actually, I want to give everybody else on this at this event an opportunity to just reflect in quiet. I know, for the fellow introverts on the call, to have a minute or two to just kind of reflect, to try to digest what you've heard can be helpful. And so if you open up your guidebook, if you have it, and turn to page 8, you'll see that there is a note page for actually tonight's event that's just kind of blank. It asks some prompting questions. So right now it's 8:41, and maybe just to give you a couple of minutes, how has your perspective on the practice of eat changed by what you've heard tonight? What does a practice reveal to you about the reality of the Christian life? These are some of the questions that we have listed there. But just take a couple of moments in silence. Feel free to kind of mute your video if you want to, if it makes you feel like a little more comfortable reflecting. And if there is a question that comes out of that, make sure that you put it in the chat. So let me give you just 2 minutes in silence like that, and just reflect on what you've heard. And maybe in particular, asking the Lord, what is it that you want me to do? Like, how do you want me to begin to practically engage in this practice? What's that small nudge, doable, sustainable, but also very intentional? So let's say the next 2 minutes and reflect in that way. Hopefully you've had a time to reflect. If any questions have emerged, again, feel free to put it into the chat. I know. I think for me, it's just I just still love this idea that people feel like they have an open door to invite themselves over for dinner. So I just wonder what that might look like in our practice in our home. It's just a compelling idea for me. So I'm going to dive into some of these questions that are coming in. And so, Aarti, these are going to be directed towards you. So for
Oh
once, I get
boy.
to ask the question, somebody else has to answer them, which is kind of a fun change of pace. But here's one that kind of dives right in. What are some questions you might ask someone in everyday meals to open up conversations to Christ or just deeper spiritual things? It may be, is it useful to get people to tell their stories or share their stories, but how have you done that in your practice of eating?
Um, well, yeah, I often will just ask people about themselves. Most people are comfortable talking about themselves, but when it comes to food, if I've made something, then I can ask them, well, what do you think about that? Have you eaten this kind of thing before? Where did you grow up? What kind of, did you have meals around the table every night? I feel like that opens people up when you talk about what are your eating traditions.
Hmm.
I think most families, most people have some, or if they didn't have any, then oh boy, dive on into that one because there's something there. But yeah, I think if you don't feel comfortable or equipped to have someone over to your house, one thing that I think is a good idea is to ask someone, what's your favorite place? What's your favorite thing to go eat? Because then you're on their territory. And so, like the first time that I shared a meal with one of my really close friends now is we went and had Korean food and we sat there and we ate the banchan and I was like, why do you like this place? This is like the whitest Korean place ever. Okay. I'm just saying it was not in Koreatown. So in LA, we're very snotty about it. And she was like, the banchan, just wait till it comes, and it just, she's not Korean. So it was just this interesting conversation of like, how did you find this place? What do you love about it? There's always those sorts of things. And eventually I feel like if you just keep listening, just slow to speak, quick to listen, you'll find it. And this past year, I've really come into this very crystal clear understanding, and I'm going to cry about it, that when you ask God to help you, he will help you.
Hmm.
And if you're doing this because you want to bring someone into the fold, right? How could he not help you? You know what I mean? I feel like there have been moments in conversation, just starting off talking about something silly, that I got that spidey sense, that little tingle, and I was like, well, hang on a second, And by the way, if your first meal with someone doesn't immediately dive into Christ, that's fine. If your third meal doesn't dive into Christ, that's also fine. Again, remember that study, the breaking of bread is the building of trust. So you're building trust and you're trying to tell this person it's safe for us to talk about things that are really important to us, really painful to us, really vulnerable. That's what I'm hoping to achieve here. And so, but yeah, usually if I talk, and one thing that ends up happening is, if I always wanted to be that kind of person that had so much Jesus in their life that it just spilled out like it was leaking, and I was not that person. And now I guess I am. So if someone then asks you a question and God is the answer to it, don't feel weird. Just say it. Just say it, because then maybe that's a way to bring God into this relationship that you're cultivating.
That's great. Our next practice, P is pause, E is eat, A is ask. And I feel like we could have you back next month and we could just talk about
Sure.
ask, right? Because I think there is something that just opens up and like a genuine curiosity. Like I really want to know. Can be so disarming, but also building that trust and a kind of sense of we're just opening up our lives together. There are a couple of other pretty practical questions that have come up. Somebody asked, how did become a parent? How did becoming a parent change your practice of hospitality?
Yeah. I saw that one cross. Um, in some ways, it makes it harder, right? Because we can't be raging at 9 p.m. My kids are in bed by 7. So that made it a little trickier. But we took Alaya to a restaurant when she was like 3 days old. And then we were on our phone and it said, don't take a child out until they're 2 months old. And we were like, well, broke the seal on that one. So our kids have grown up eating at restaurants. So they're really good at it. I think it teaches them manners. It teaches them taking turns in conversation. It teaches them how to have a conversation. So don't be afraid. I can't remember if indoor dining is happening yet in New York. But don't be afraid to take your kids because you think they might cause a ruckus. It's fine. Just take them outside for a walk, then bring them back in. But the idea that I can bring my kids with me and still invite someone, I love because when kids are there, people are also a little bit on their best behavior. And when a kid asks them a question, then I don't know, it just levels the playing field. And my kids are like little evangelists. They'll be like, so do you believe in God? Like they just go straight to it. And what am I going to do? I'm just like cutting my meat. Like, are you going to answer the child? The other thing that I think is really great about having children is if your family practices to pray before a meal and to pray out loud, then that is not going to change just because someone has come over to dinner, right? So for my kids, they have learned all of these little songs that they sing before they pray. And so whether we're at a restaurant or we're at home, it happens. And so I have seen people really respect that and just be like, well, this is what you and your family do. They bow their head, they listen. They may have their own opinions about it. That's fine, but they're hearing it and they're seeing it. And for me, I sometimes wonder, for people who are not believers, it could be because they grew up with it and they've had enough. It could also be because they've never experienced it in their life. They've never heard someone pray. They've never heard someone talk to God. And I think there's something so vulnerable. I hear people's voices change when they talk to God, right? Like the way you and I talk to each other, when we pray, like our voices are so different. And it's very like, it's so vulnerable. So I keep coming back to that same thing, but I do think whether it's a child singing or you praying before a meal, I have found that to be really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that we found with kids is, I think, on the one hand, it kind of takes the pressure off of the hosting because you almost set people up to say, look, it's going to be chaos.
Yeah.
I apologize
Yes.
for the chaos.
Yes.
You're okay with coming to the chaos. We would love to have you.
Yeah.
And it kind of sets the expectation a different sort of way and has that feel of we're inviting you into our life as long as people are okay with that. And I think it also, like you were saying, I think it draws our children into seeing eating as a spiritual practice, right? They see that moment, right, in some pretty powerful ways. And so, yeah, I think it definitely changes things as they get older. Maybe it gets a little bit easier, but those first few months, it's just a survival game. But over time, you start to realize, okay, we could figure this out again in new ways.
Yeah.
Right? So,
yeah.
Let me see if I can get to a couple more questions here before we run out of time. Here's a great question. Someone is asking, should I even try to cook an international food to kind of match the background of the guest? Or is that taking coals to Newcastle?
What's taking coals to Newcastle?
So I think Newcastle, I believe, is a town in England that's known for its coal.
Oh, right. Okay, I get it. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I mean, unless you feel really confident that you're going to nail it, then sure. I mean, it's a sweet gesture and stuff. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It depends on the person. Like if someone invited me over and they had made a curry and they used curry powder and they put raisins in it, like my heart would break because I'm like, that's not curry. But but I would see their heart in it and I would obviously still eat it and thank them profusely. But I think, wouldn't it be cooler if you made something that that you were really good at and then you said, hey, next time, can I come to your house and can you make me something that you grew up eating? I think that's so cool to sort of let them be the expert in their thing. And even, you could even say, I will help you. I'll come and chop onions, like whatever it is that you need, I'll come and help you. I mean, that's my special joy, to sort of learn how to cook things from other people. But yeah, I wouldn't. The only time I did that actually was when the only people that we've had over was actually my pastor and his wife and their 4 kids, sorry. And there was a cookbook. She's Chinese. She's trying to cook more Chinese. And so there's a cookbook that I told her husband to buy. And I have it too. And so I picked some things from that cookbook to sort of show her like these are doable. And I bought extra ingredients so that she could take it home. The things that were like hard to find, I bought extra so she could take it home and cook as well.
Hmm.
That's the only time I've done that.
That's great. I mean, part of what I hear there maybe could be a really practical tip that when you're hosting people, maybe cook something that has a little bit of a story for you.
Yeah.
Right, kind of. So this is why this is a special dish for me, kind of growing up. Because one of the things that my wife and I wonder about sometimes too is like when people over, should we cook them Korean food? Like that's fun and we like it, but not everybody's gonna be a big pork fan like I am. Not everybody's gonna be able to handle the spicy. Or
Yeah.
try to shift over to something that kind of accommodates and makes it maybe less culturally distant for somebody. But I guess it depends on the guest, and you try to figure
Yeah.
out. And yeah, I love the idea of starting the process of inviting yourself over to dinner. Right, just invite yourself over. You can
Yeah.
invite yourself over here. You know.
I just,
Yeah.
I mean, what's someone going to say? No.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Let me see if I can squeeze in another question here. There's so many good ones, and I really
I
am
know. I'm sorry, guys.
through. Well, so somebody's asking, how do you balance the act of serving and being hospitable while at the same time recharging yourself? You know, we're coming off the practice of pause, where we're saying keeping a Sabbath before God, entering into God's rest is actually crucial to live on mission with Jesus. If you're not doing that, you're just going to flare out, you're going to burn out, you know, it's not sustainable. How do you balance those acts of hospitality and serving with self recharging or Sabbath practices?
Well, I think for me, I have to like, okay, so if I know that someone is coming over, I do have a tendency, and if my husband was here, he would be rolling his eyes. I do have a tendency to go a little overboard. I will make a couple, 5, 6 things and go a little nuts. And what ends up happening every single time is that then I'm so stressed out that when they come over, I am giving out that stressed energy. And in that moment, I'm like, I did this for the wrong reasons. So I would actually integrate pause and eat.
Mm.
So the pause would be in your planning of the dinner on the day that you're doing it, whether you're meeting someone or making it, pause and double check that your heart is in the right place. Because then, I mean, we serve a servant king, right? So if we're coming out of that fountain, if we're operating out of that fountain and we're refreshed and we're full, then the serving is going to be one of the things that he helps us to do. And it's not going to feel like a chore.
Right.
You know, we did Thanksgiving for like 35 people one year. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And I definitely was a little bit stressed out on the day just because like my turkey was not happening. And I was like, but the turkey. And I ended up not being that hungry. But the thing that I loved was that then when we sat down and I saw all of these people from different parts of my life and people I didn't even know talking to each other. Oh my gosh. I was like, this is so worth it. Like, you know, I've maybe overserved here and I'm not done a great job of it, but God has taken the reins because he knew what my intention was. And they're not feeling any of it, you know, because I tried as much as possible to start from pause.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And it's a great word because we talk about how all these practices kind of layer
Yeah.
on top of each other, you know, and there's an interplay there and that sort of everything. You know, one of the things for my wife and I, she's much more of an extrovert, much more of the hospitality person. I'm a little bit more of an introvert. You know, a night with a book is maybe just as good as anything else. But I mean, part of why we've settled on trying to do this every other Tuesday thing is trying to feel out what are our rhythms, and every person's
Mhm.
going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. You don't have to feel this pressure to hit some sort of you know, arbitrary standard, but to find what are the sustainable rhythms where in my life I can be intentional about eating like Jesus ate. And so that's why we're trying out this every other Tuesday, and maybe we'll ramp it up to every Tuesday, and you know, it's a party every Tuesday at the Cho Home, which you know, but we're trying to feel out what are those rhythms, what's the balance between pause and eat, and so
Yeah,
that's great.
it's important.
Well, go ahead, huh?
No, I was just going to say it's important. It's important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. All right, I would love to continue, but it's 8:59 and we have a few more things that we want to sort through. So one of the things that I want to invite everybody on this call to do now is I'm just going to give everyone a minute and to reflect and then put in the chat, what's one concrete next step that you want to take, that you want to commit to as far as building a sustainable practice of eat into your life. It might be, I just want to go and think through a list of 10 people that I want to begin to open my life to. Maybe you're 10, you're like, oh my gosh, that's terrifying. 5, 3, one person. That's okay. You know, don't be intimidated by that. So it might be just thinking about who are the people you want to invite into your life, or it might be other practical ideas of how do I get started, what's sustainable. So take a minute now. It's already 9, and I apologize for going over a little bit here, but just take 1 minute to reflect on that, and then as you put them in the chat, I'll just read them out. But take a moment right now to reflect on that question. Okay, and as you reflect, I'm just going to read some of the things that I'm seeing here. Uh, someone says just to start praying out loud with the baby before every meal. Invite our next door neighbors to dine with us. COVID shots is an excellent next step for sure. Put more thought into praying before eating. I want to have a consistent meal with one person once a month. That's great. Very concrete, also very doable. Inviting myself over to someone's house. Absolutely. Mary Cameron, you need to invite yourself over to our house. Please do that. Listen more, slow to speak. It's amazing how that requires some intentionality, doesn't it? Cook for my building staff. They're a big help with everything. It's great. Invite friends to dinner. Inviting myself over a lot more. Yes, Jenny, absolutely. Give a good gift. Invite people on my hall to have a drink each week this month. Which is great. Aarti, I love, you talked about 20 to 30-minute coffee. You knew it was going to be quick and it wasn't a huge commitment. Dine with neighbors. Just discuss with the family or roommates if you have. How do you begin to do this? What do you like about our eating traditions? What would you like to change? I'm going too slowly through this. Sorry, there's so many great ones here. Continue to keep having a meal with friends, coffee with Zoom with some friends, intentional relationships, distributing home cooked meal with homeless neighbors. That's great. And we can remember that our eating to cross a difference. That difference can sometimes be that socioeconomic or other things like that. Scheduling more 30-minute coffee dates. Vince is going to start doing backyard barbecues, and now suddenly he's going to have a couple hundred guests next time he does that. So anyways, lots of really great suggestions here, but just to encourage you to get concrete. What is that next step? So this becomes a healthy, sustainable, life-giving practice, and that you find that you're in deep relationship with people who are different from you. Again, whether of a different faith background or no faith or a different ethnic background, you begin to see just a small commitment and a small practice really makes a great difference. So continue to reflect on that and use page 8 in your guidebook to do that. Let me go over a couple of very quick just kind of announcements or ways to kind of wrap things up. So eat, this entire month of March, we're doing focusing on eat and challenging everybody to build this practice into your lives. So to take the challenge of eat, experience and spread hospitality with someone in your usual sphere of life and also someone outside of it. So we already talked about pray who you might eat with this month. We say twice a week, reimagine a meal, or if a meal makes you uncomfortable, which totally makes sense in this particular environment, is there another activity that you can just intentionally invite someone different from you, someone near to you into your life together. So that's the EAT challenge for the month of March. We want to help focus our energies to build that into our lives. If you go to the next slide there. Okay, great. And so a couple of tools that we want to help you to do this. First is that guidebook. Use that to encourage you in this challenge as an opportunity to reflect. There are a couple of great recipes in there, by the way, that are fun. One for to do with kids, but also we have Artie's non-recipe in there, which would be a fun thing to do. A second tool or support that you'll need is to do it with community, in your community group, do it with others. Find ways to help and encourage one another in this practice. When it gets safe to do so, throw parties with other people and invite friends and neighbors over. And then the third thing that we're offering is the passing of the peace of eat. And so, we talk about in this month to practice these things, but also to pass the peace with our Hope for New York affiliates. And so those are just some ways that you can take a next step in this. And so we hope that all those are helpful resources for you, just to find ways. We're not all going to do it in the same way, but to find ways in our own lives to build this practice into our lives. And so I hope this was a fun evening for you. I hope it was inspiring. I hope it was challenging and practical. And my prayer, I just think about what Jesus can do when you have a couple hundred Christians regularly eating with people who don't yet know Christ, who are different in many different ways. The Spirit will do something, and it will be a remarkable thing. And so, just want to challenge you to know that we're part of a larger group of people trying to keep these practices together. So, I can keep on talking. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to invite Aarti. Would you pray for us this evening to close us out?
Yeah, you can hear my praying voice. Very vulnerable right now. All right. Lord Jesus, it can feel really hard, Lord. I know, I'm in a new place and stuff, and it can feel very hard and very intimidating to sit down with someone who is different from you, and kind of what your intention is, but it can just feel really hard. And so, Lord, I just put it on the altar to you. I put my fear, I put this sense of being intimidated, I put it on the altar, Father. Jesus, you took a couple of fish and some bread and you made it multiply. And so, Lord, will you take what little we have to offer and increase it incrementally? If we could all share the joy, God, of what you've done, that you have adopted us, that you have invited us to the table, that you have promised us an incredible feast one day. I cannot wait to eat with you, Lord. And so I pray that you would give us the courage, you would give us the perseverance to figure out a way to break bread with people, to break their loneliness, to break their maybe their blindness, Lord. You are the God of miracles. And so I pray that you would help us to invite people into the miracle of what you've done for us, Lord, so that everyone can partake and be at the table on that great day. Amen.
Amen. Aarti, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Passion is infectious. It was such a fun conversation. And if you look in the chat, you'll notice a lot of folks is really grateful for your time.
Thank you guys so much. Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I meant to say this at the beginning. Thank you for having me. I am so dorked out. I'm a huge Redeemer fan, huge. And so it really means a lot to me that you guys invited me and that you would sit around and listen to me for an hour. So thank you so much. I have so much respect for all of you. I know how hard it is to, frankly, to be a Christian in a big city like New York. So keep going, guys. Don't stop. You're doing great work. Amen and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Aarti.